That's it. Woo!
I'd like to call to order the February 19th, 2025 meeting of the Chagrin Falls Board of Education. Ashley, please take the roll.
Mrs. Bendel.
Here.
Mr. Bordner.
Here.
Mrs. Hoy.
Here.
Mrs. Miller is not here, and Dr. Sabo.
Here.
Okay, we have some special guests with us tonight. I'm going to have them come up and introduce themselves. Who wants to say them?
Is your microphone on?
Can you hear those, Mr. Doherty? And so, so whose class is it? And what's your favorite thing about second grade? Everything.
All of it.
Nice. What's your least favorite thing about second grade? Wow. Okay. Would you like to help us with the pledge of allegiance? All right. Would you like to stand over here? Right here, into the microphone. Everybody can hear you. Move over here. There you go. There you go. Whenever you're ready, you go ahead and start.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I need to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley?
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
And I move to approve the minutes from our 1/15/2025 organization meeting, our 1/15/2025, 1/22/2025, 1/29/2025, and 2/1/2025 meetings and work sessions. Do I have?
I'll second.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
So tonight, if it's okay, we'll start with 2.02, which is the student showcase, and then I'll go back and run through the kindergarten enrollment information for the families. But it's the CC, who's the assistant principal at Gurney Elementary, will introduce our group tonight. Is anyone?
So we have our second grade students from Mrs. Dugach and Mrs. Ross's class, and we have spent a lot of time as a building talking about personalized learning for the first half of the year. So they are going to highlight all of the amazing things that they have done in their second grade classroom, and specifically, they're going to highlight the grid method. And so that's been one unique thing that they have done in the classroom this year that they're super excited to share with you tonight. I'm going to turn it over to them.
Hi, my name is Clifton. Hi, my name is Paige. We are in second grade students in Miss Dugach and Miss Ross's class. Hi, my name is Ava. We are excited to share what the grid method is and how we use it in the classroom. This is an example of a grid that we use in the classroom. Everyone starts on level 1, and when we have a new grid, for this grid, you have to move across and complete each task in level 1. Before you can move to level 2, when you are on level 2, it is a little bit harder with different tasks. When you are on each level, you never repeat any activities. The green check mark means that you need to do a teacher check-in before you can move on. The black X means that you have completed that task.
When you reach level 3 and 4, it gets harder because there are more than one step. In level 4, you also get to create your own activity. For the grid, we created our own nonsense word. For my nonsense story, I made up a word word, which is Zudish, which means crazy unicorn. When we are working on our own grid, this is posted on the Clever Touch in the classroom. We each have our own avatar that we move when we finish each section of the grid. The avatars are based on our hair and eye color. If we need help, we slide our avatar to help section. Once we are done with the level, you slide your avatar to check-in box for a teacher check-in before you can go to the next level. In most levels, we get to be the teacher and find the mistakes. Some things may look right, but they are not. So you have to mark it wrong and then fix it to what the correct answer is. This is an example of Miss Dugash's dog named Maddie. We had to correct Maddie's work by fixing the syllables, the vowels, and the sentence punctuations. We were like we are the teachers. On level 4 of this grid, we create our own board game for Foundations. One game that was designed was called Beckham's Vowel Content E Airplane Game. In level 4, you are able to create your own board game, came up with your own rules, and we played each other's game during entire times. Here are some examples of digital board games and board games used poster boards with question cards and spinners that we created. I like this grid because we didn't have to go across and do everything in each level. Everyone could pick what they wanted to work on. On level 4, we got to create our own board game. The hardest part in this grid was Project Read because we had to use our voice on the Chromebook and it had a hard time listening to what we were saying. This was my favorite because you get to pick your own thing like trick words, sounds and spelling, or marking. I also liked that there were multiple things in each box. For this grid, everyone had something similar but different so that you were prepared for the next show what you know. What I liked about this grid was creating a game board, the word search, and be a teacher. I also liked how you were able to pick one thing to work on instead of going through all of the levels. Thank you for learning about our grid method and coming to our presentation.
Thank you very much, that was great. So is this a unit that you guys did, or is this something that you do every time there's a new subject? You get to make different board games, or how often do you do this?
Like every
Only in Foundations
and like every unit. Like every time you learn something new.
And is this the first
You have a
time
show what you know and then you pick which one you go.
Oh, okay. Did you do this in first grade too?
No.
So do you like this in second grade?
Yes.
Great. And what's your favorite thing about it?
The game board.
The
Yeah,
game
the
board.
game board.
And what was that unicorn word again?
Crazy unicorn.
The crazy unicorn. What was the word you made up?
Zudish.
Zuddish?
Zudish.
I love that. I'm gonna use that. That's awesome.
And I actually got to spend the day with this class, and I got to see this in action, and the way that you're able to move the avatars is amazing, and the ownership. I love the games too, but my favorite part was when we had to decode Mrs. Ross's dog's work, like when it was wrong. We had to do all the corrections to what was wrong with that. That was my favorite thing that we did. But you did such a great job, and it's a great thing to see in action with the classes too.
That's awesome. Thank you. And thank you to our teachers here too. That's awesome.
Thank you, guys.
So thank you guys for coming, and we would love to have you stay if you want to, but we totally understand you probably have other things to do tonight. So we'll just let you guys sneak out if you want, and we'll continue with our meeting in a minute. Thanks. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Great job. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
I'm gonna do the kindergarten, but I'm just setting this up all right here.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, sorry. It will be if it's needed. So here, oh, it's in this. Nobody's really gonna take pictures of this.
Probably not.
Not in your way, am I? I'm sitting here, you can
Really
see.
just space forward.
Okay.
I would like to be known as Zadish for the rest of
Zadish,
the
I'm a magical
I
unicorn.
mean, really, which part of speech? That's what I wanted to know.
So if we go back to 2.01, just the kindergarten registration, we just wanted to make sure that this was printed and that we ensure that we know that we're excited to welcome our future Tigers, which will be the class of 2038.
Oh my goodness.
Families
Yeah.
and children who will be in kindergarten age this fall should take note of the important dates in our kindergarten registration process. And those are listed. February 1st was when it opened. April 4th is when families who've registered will receive kindergarten kickoff email, a welcome letter, a video, and resource links. And then May 9th is probably the important date. It's the deadline to reserve a spot in full day kindergarten. So we just want to encourage everyone to go to our website, which is chagrinschools.org/kindergarten, to get the information. And if you know someone with a child turning 5 on or before August 1st, please encourage them to register. And registration really does help us, especially early registration, because kindergarten is one of those grades that we're never sure exactly how many teachers we'll need.
Right.
So a lot of it is based on that early enrollment, and then we also have to look at what we were predicting based on history and so any work to get people registered or help them get the information would be greatly appreciated. The next one is just 2.03.
So this is a presentation on our evaluation process. And we have discussed, every once in a while, we hear things in the community, we hear questions, we hear that people are interested in things, and we don't always know until, it's interesting in this job because most of us have not worked much in the public sector. And in the public sector, there are so many more regulations and rules. Public schools are the most heavily regulated industry in the state. So evaluations look a lot different in the public sector than they do in the private sector. So, sometimes you hear, oh, there's not enough evaluations, or evaluations are very harsh, or you're not evaluating people. So we thought we asked Jennifer to pull together a report on evaluations and how they work both for central office, but also for all of our staff, all of our employees, so you get an idea of what it is that we're doing behind the scenes and how that shapes and helps the district shape instruction.
Perfect. And the one thing I'll warn you is I actually did evaluations for every staff member in the district, so you can see how things are common or different. And the other part of this presentation will be there are compliance requirements set forth by our Ohio Revised Code, which would be the legislation. We have board policy that also drives some of this, as well as our negotiated agreements with our classified and certified unions. So that's what we'll talk about a little bit tonight. But we really think about evaluation as a tool to help grow, support, and provide true accountability for our employees. And that's across the board, no matter what kind of process or system that we use. So I broke this down into different categories because there are so many different types of people in the district, and their evaluations are different, just so that we could work through each one individually. So there are annual evaluations. These are people that are evaluated fully on the full rubric. Most of these pieces have a rubric attached every year. So that includes pre-conferences, that might include observations, whether those are formal observations or kind of what we see or the work that's being done, and then a final evaluation, which we'll share. But these are the people. So superintendent, the treasurer, all of the principals, any central office administrator. You might think, well, what's a central office administrator? That would be like your directors or the assistant superintendents, those kinds of things. Supervisors would be like your transportation department, your food service department, your custodian, maintenance department. And while I say that, let me give a shout out to maintenance, facilities, grounds, and custodians. They have done an amazing job with this ice and snow on our campus. We have some of the cleanest places of anywhere that I've been, and it's because they work so hard and put so many hours in. So kudos to them. Other kinds of classified employees would be educational aides or administrative assistants at the building, that kind. When it says exempt employees, those might be employees that would be in Ashley's office, people that you might see when you enter central office, like an Aaron or like Delia and Christy, who are admin assistants at the central office level. So those are kind of exempt employees. Things like our community ed, Deb Wilkinson would be under this. And then you have contracted services, which would be any person or service that we're contracting for the year. And the one that I can draw out on, just as an example, would be like our ESC employee, Kathy Mack, that's doing our gifted analysis for this year. So she would still be evaluated and reported back to the ESC because she's working for us. So things like that. Then you have the teacher and school counselor evaluations. They go through what's called an on-cycle and an off-cycle evaluations. So employees will have one of these types of evaluations annually, and I'll walk you through what those look like. It's just according to what's called OTES, or Ohio Teacher Evaluation System, or OSES. I think that's how you say that one. I know we're also OSES, so I think you have to say the C differently, but that's the Ohio School Counselor Evaluation System. So when we talked about those full or those off-cycle evaluations, the employees' type of evaluation for this category is determined by how they're rated. So if they're rated as accomplished, they have a full evaluation once every 3 years, and then they would have off-cycle evaluations the other 2 years. Skilled is a 2-year cycle, so a full evaluation and off year. And if someone is developing or ineffective, they are having a full evaluation every year. The other exception in the law, actually the Ohio Revised Code, would be that if your contract is in renewal that year, so we're issuing you a contract that year, the law does say that you would go through a full evaluation cycle. So that was a piece that some people miss. Actually, when we audited our practices here, when I came, we noticed that not all contract renewals were having the full evaluation, and we're in the process of making sure that that happens, and I can show you what that looks like.
Are you going to, can you explain what the differences between the full and
It's in
three
here.
year?
So if we talk through evaluation tools, here are the different types of evaluations. These are the ones that are developed by the Ohio Department of Education, state-level professional organizations. They're listed board policy, negotiated agreements. And if you click on any of those, you can actually go to the site to see the rubric that's used for that type of evaluation. So very helpful. If you'll notice, these are kind of your professionally licensed positions, is how I would describe these. So they're set forth in the Ohio Revised Code. Things like your central office, your supervisors, your exempt, your classified, except preschool aides. Preschool aides have to have a certain type of evaluation for the step up the quality process if they're serving preschool. And our contracted services, those are locally developed evaluation tools. We model those after what you just saw in the state required tool. And they also have classification input, they have board policy input, negotiated agreement input, and in some cases there's Ohio Revised Code requirement for like a renewal of contract or a non-renewal of contract, how many, that their contracts are signed and they're done within a certain period of time. So those may be requirements, but there's not an approved tool that every district uses. So what Chagrin uses may look different than what Kenston or Orange would use for these groups, although there's a kind of collaboration around the state on these tools. Here's what Lori had asked about evaluation components. So if you are an OSES, that's mine, Superintendent Evaluation System, OTRES, a central office administrator, a supervisor, an exempt employee, or a contracted service person. This is the minimum that would occur. So we would do goal setting around the strategic plan. You would have a mid-year formative, which is done on the full rubric for Ashley and I because we have full rubrics from the state. And then you would do a final summative for, again, full rubric for us. And any one of these positions that have a full rubric or have and most of them do, like what they aspire to do in those positions or what the key skills are, those would be followed. Now, what you'll see different about these specifically is there may not be a formal evaluation because evaluation is occurring all the time. And there's still feedback given along the way. And there are pre and post conferences where you would have pre-discussion, for example, for me, what my goals are, what we want to set for the year based on the data, based on what we're trying to achieve with our strategic plan. And at each point, so at the goal setting, at the mid-year, at the final, there would be a post-conference, in this case with the Board of Education, to see where we fall and what we want to work on for growth, supports, needs, to help that person succeed. The next one would be the annual evaluation components of our classified employees. So remember, this is somewhat negotiated in our board policy. They'll have the same kind of goal setting.
Can you explain the difference between classified and certified?
Sure. So classified would be our administrative assistants at the building, educational assistants, bus drivers, it would be maintenance, it would be grounds, it would be facilities, it would be food service, and I'm probably forgetting some, but
Drivers. Did you say bus drivers?
I hope I did. I think I did. They're important. But this is kind of what that system looks like. So again, you see the pre and post conference at the bottom, but they set a goal. Typically in this group, they may only have one observation, sometimes two, but they'll have kind of a mid-year where they're at with their goals and then the final. It just depends. I mean, think about what a bus driver observation might look like. They may do two, they may do one. But this is kind of the process that they follow, and there are forms that go along with this.
And then who does the evaluation?
So that would be their supervisor. So in most of these, it's whoever your supervisor is. When it comes to principals, which is the screen I'm on now, OPES, Ohio Principal Evaluation System, we assign some of those to central office staff. So for example, Jared, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Student Advancement, is evaluating the assistant principals this year. And then on that first list, I do most, that would fall under the educational umbrella, licensure, and then Ashley would work with Jen, the assistant treasurer, to do her department. So that's kind of how it works. OPES is an interesting monster because it has the same type of rubric and requirements as the teacher evaluation system, but they have to do the full evaluation every single year, and they get a rating. So if a principal is rated accomplished, it doesn't matter the following year. They're still fully rated under the rubric for the following year.
So our principals, I'm just gonna slow you down for a second because there's so many acronyms. So our principals, that's OPES, which is statutory, and they are evaluated fully every year.
Correct. And these are the compliance pieces of our evaluation process.
Right.
I'll share some fun stuff in a minute.
Right, so compliance, these are the things we have to do for statutory reasons.
Right. And so I put the requirements on there so that you could see that, for example, observations have to be more than 30 minutes. Walkthroughs have to be less than 30 minutes, or they're considered an observation. So there are nice little compliance things that you jump through. But
And
this
it's
is the
saying we
process.
have to do it for compliance reasons, I don't mean it's bad.
No.
I just mean it's a baseline, right? It's something we look at as a place where we're gonna start.
What makes Chagrin unique is that we don't just do the compliance. So we're about the growth. We're about the supports. We think that the professional growth plans and what they do to renew licensure through our local professional development committee, LPDC, is what really makes the day-to-day difference. And so that's why I'm kind of calling this the compliance piece. It's important, and if you look at the principal rubric, it's absolutely insane. So I think it has 10 categories now. And let me tell you that anything that begins with an O, right?
Is compliance.
OTES, OSTES, those kinds of things, those have to have a trained evaluator. So for example, every 2 years I have to go through OPES training. And I have to watch the video, and I have to do the ratings, And it has to meet the state standards so that the state knows that I am truly being compliant. I'm a licensed OPES or certificated, however that works, OPES evaluator. The same for teachers. Our principals here go through the training and go through the evaluation. And I don't know if you remember, but one of Corey Honaki, the principal of instruction's strongest traits for us was that he is a trainer.
Oh,
both of
right.
these. So we have almost an expert on staff as well. So when there's a glitch or something we don't understand, he's been there for us. So this is the teacher and the school counselors. This would be the full evaluation, and if you look at it, looks very similar to the principal one, but I want to draw your attention to what changed in OTES 2.0, and that's the second observation. So instead of having to be evaluated on the full teacher rubric, we pick a focus area, and we only do an observation more than 30 minutes that really is on that targeted focus area. And that's a change in the law that changed how that works. So this would be what those two evaluations look like. And then the off-year evaluation cycle, you're required to do one observation, that would be on the full rubric, one conference, and then there's no rating.
So teachers who are accomplished have a rating every 3 years?
Right, because there's 2 years
So
off.
2 years off, and then the third year is the full evaluation for rating, and then the other 2 years is the observation.
Right, and if there would be any kind of improvement or things that we would want to put in place, we can always do that in an off-cycle year. But I think it's important to understand what an off-year evaluation is, because sometimes people say, well, nothing. It's not true, because there is an observation and a conference. There's just not a rating.
Okay.
So sometimes it gets overlooked. And then with both the principal and the teacher and the school counselor evaluations, we have what's called high quality student data. Now, if you think or ever heard back to value added and some of the early teacher evaluations, this was almost 50% of the final rating, which caused a lot of shock when it first went into place, the first version. Now it's just a component that's embedded. So we still have to follow all these high quality data requirements, but now it's embedded in that rubric and embedded in that rating. So there's not a specific percentage assigned. I was trying to get Corey to give me a percentage, and he didn't like that because it's not really 1/5,
Okay.
right? 2 walkthroughs, 2 observations, high quality data, which is what I was trying to get him to agree
Okay.
to. And he said not really, because that high quality student data is embedded. Yeah.
So that's from the report card? Where's the high quality student data?
Well, either from value added, which would
Okay.
be from our testing,
Right.
approved vendor assessments, there's a list, or what the district has determined would be an appropriate high-quality student data component. We have a committee that works on that and identifies those things.
Okay.
So each grade level has their own. And then principals are accountable to the types of high-quality data that are in their building. So as part of their observation with me, they have to show where they're looking at or using high-quality data and what it is. So they may not show me in my time with them all of the different teachers and all of the different components, but theirs is embedded as well in that rubric. So again, I just wanted to draw out the difference between the full cycle and the off cycle and how that works. This again is for the teachers and for the school counselors. And then I know there were questions about what does that look like. So how many people have to go through a full evaluation? This is just OTES and the school counselor, so teacher and counselor evaluation system data. So like in 2021, there were 67 full evaluations. The other question that I had come up was how many people fall in each category after the evaluation. So that's what you're seeing. That was in 2021, 22. 23, there were 22, 23 is the school year. There were 50 full evaluations. This is how people fell. And then if you notice, there were 72 full evaluations in 23, 24. Some of the questions are, why did that grow? Well, if you have a first-year teacher, someone new, they'll have a full evaluation. And we did do hiring along the way. The other piece was picking up some of those contract renewals that I talked to you about that was required, where someone might have a full. And then understand every 3 years or every 2 years, depending if you're accomplished or skilled, those numbers are going to increase or decrease. The other question that I talked to Corey about that we get asked a lot is, well, how does this compare with state, right? With the state data, the state information. And really where it falls is that over 90% of the teachers fall in accomplished or skilled, which is interesting. So if you add up our totals, we're right within that window, if not a little higher. But I would say we have also more tenured teachers than districts that might have a lot of new hires. I just think we have a lot of tenured teachers and school counselors. So I want to go back to this question, how do we align our support, growth, and true accountability in our employee evaluation process? And this is for all employees. And we talked through the compliance, which is important. It keeps us on schedule, it keeps us good. They're good rubrics, they're what we use to draft things. But I think what makes the difference here and what we're really striving to achieve are to focus on those professional growth plans and to know those professional growth plans so that we know for each person, and I think of it as personalized, individualized. I want to know what each person that I'm evaluating needs or wants to accomplish or achieve. And in, for example, most of the people I work with, we're working on a student achievement goal. If they're a principal, like what's the achievement for our building, where are we focusing on? And then sometimes we're looking on a growth leadership role. So as a leader, as a principal, what am I doing to grow and improve? It could also be something like operational. Sometimes I'll see that written into those goals. Right? That's their professional growth plan. That is the goal setting as well. And what's really helpful now is we have the strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
So now anything that we're writing and that we're putting in is aligned to our strategic plan. So we don't want anything that's not aligned to high quality learning experiences, to student and staff well-being, or to strategic resourcing. You can see like strategic resourcing would be a huge place for goals for people that are in our supervisory roles, so like our transportation, our food service. Someone like Chris Wolfter that's working in HR and facilities. Those are places where we're probably going to see more of the strategic resourcing operational side of goal setting. And then the part that we're really stretching this year with our instructional coaches and what we're working on, even in all of our administrative roles, is that ongoing coaching. So that if someone needs support, help, someone even just wants to grow. So I want to grow in this area, or I want to strengthen what I know about this. We're aligning them with coaching to be able to do that, even if it's not written as part of a compliance piece of the evaluation process. So our people go above and beyond, and they take this seriously. And that's why I think we have the greatest impact here on elevating all of our employees, is because we have all those components in place. Again, here are places to learn more. This will be linked to the agenda so that you can get everything. But you can click on any of these topics. If you go to the Ohio State Board of Education, you can look at educator standards and programs, educator evaluations. I see Kathy is here, and she's one of our LPDC people, so helps with those individualized growth plans, which helps with licensure renewal. There are so many components that people go through. It's hard to say it's one thing, but I think we get stuck on things like the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System is what we do. Well, it's one piece of what our teachers do. It's one piece of what our principals do. So it's important to understand. I knew I threw a lot at you fast. We tried to make it very component-oriented. Do you have any questions about any of the pieces that I shared that I could answer with you? It's okay if you have questions later, too. I just think sometimes it's good to look at what's the minimum requirements and how are we exceeding that and what does that look like?
So I'm just going to back up for a second. So we talked about compliance, and we talked about what statutory requirements are, and some of this is in policy, and some of it, but mostly it's statutory. And we have evaluations that are the formal evaluations of our teachers every 3 years. We have our central office staff every year.
Depending on rating.
Depending on rating.
Okay.
Many, some are 2, some are 1, some depending on their seniority, right? So if they're a new teacher, they get evaluated.
If their contracts are new. So if they're up for a contract renewal. So that could be like a first-year teacher, because they're on what's called a limited contract. So they would have a contract renewal. So no matter if they came out and accomplished their first year,
Right.
they're still going to be evaluated, or should be evaluated in year 2, because their contract is up for renewal.
So for people who, again, this is public sector, and we're used to sort of an annual evaluation and a very sort of formalized process if you're in the private sector. What do we do, and I know you touched on this, but I want to highlight it, what do we do as a district to make sure that there's growth and support for teachers in addition to what we're statutorily required to do
Right.
as a baseline?
And I want to pull that out because it's for every employee. So it's even
Okay.
for our annual evaluations. And just to be clear, remember, it's off cycle or on cycle for the teachers and the school counselors. But so what do we do if we go back? I think I can go back a couple. So there's professional growth plans. There are professional growth plans embedded in those Ohio compliance. And I'm just using compliance because that's the best word I have for it. Pieces. So they would write growth goals and things within that document and process. We write them in every group I work with. So when I work with someone like Mike Doherty for technology, communication innovation, he would have what he wants to accomplish or he wants to achieve. So we call that his growth plan. There's also an overarching growth plan, and that's for renewing your licensure. And I'm watering this down a little bit, but we're required by the Ohio Revised Code, by legislation, to have a committee that ensures that every teacher, anyone that has those owe a licensure, right? I'm not doing the Ohio State thing, but the O in front of it. So when they're required, they have to write what's called an individualized, personal, I don't,
Ippy-dippy.
but I don't want to go into what it's actually
Personal
is.
development plan, I
Yeah,
think.
something like that.
There we go.
Thank
Okay,
you.
and that's typically every 5 years, because licensures renew every 5 years. But again, if we do it right, we link that to your professional growth plan. So when you're evaluated, it's all embedded. And so, and like I said, Kathy sits on that committee, I sit on that committee, we review everything. So when there is a professional development or when there is something that they turn in their hours for, we certify that it aligns with their plan, it aligns with the district standards. And that's how they collect their hours to renew anyone that had. I just renewed mine, so I applied for my renewal, and it was because I turned in my hours. They aligned with my plan. They were approved. Once I get that approval, I can renew. So that's a little different because some of those other employees that I showed you on the annuals don't necessarily have a contract, or I'm sorry, like a license, a professional license that we renew. So that's part one of what we're talking about. Part two, the goal setting. We just want to make sure that everything that we're required to do, whether it's compliance or because we want to grow, that it's all aligned, right? So we don't want an ippy-dippy, a 5-year for license renewal, that has components that aren't linked to what a principal is doing for their OPES goal setting for the year. Like, we want linkage so that when we're doing growth, when we're doing supports, that they're going in one direction. And it really used to be, and maybe Kathy can speak to this, but I can tell you personally from my experience with even being in the teacher role or in the evaluation, it felt very disjointed for a long time. And I felt the weight of all these different things I had to do, and that clarity of what my growth plan was missing. So we're really intentional to make sure that that's done here and now aligned to our strategic plan.
Kathy? Yeah, can I put you on the spot? Sure. So, do you, like, with the growth plan and the coaching and are you starting to feel some of that, the motion and the coordination and the alignment? Because I know alignment is something people have talked about a long time.
Correct. Well, the other piece that is part of this, I don't know if that's the compliant part, we also now are, everything is aligned to a state standards.
Okay.
So there's a list of state standards that we have to follow, and when we set up our professional growth plan, they have to meet one of the standards. There are elements, there's indicators, I mean, there's like this whole flow chart.
Okay.
So that helps guide us, and then I would say that, the goal setting matches with the strategic plan. So it kind of is like a trickle down, because everything that is goal setting is connected to the professional growth plan, which is connected to the teacher or counselor state standards of professional.
And we have that,
Okay.
again, for
Okay.
every professional license. So principals have that, I have that. Ashley has that even though it's technically business side of the spectrum, but she has those kinds of things as well. So the professional standards are part of the whole piece. That's good. And then the coaching
No, that's great.
can be like the day-to-day help and supports as well, which you're constantly working to be better in your profession. And so those coaches are now on the ground and there's some more of them. And I just personally know I've been in the room with the math coach and Kathy, and the conversations they're having about, well, if I approach it this way, what would happen? And then what if we tried this? Like, to me, that's coaching, and that's what we're doing to help and support each other.
Because that was sort of an aha moment for me. I was talking to Jared, and he said, we were talking about the evaluation structure and how different it looks from what I'm used to, having not worked in a school. And he said, well, that's why the coaching model is so great, because it provides it's not an evaluation, it's not this sort of statutory requirement that we're gonna do this evaluation, it's support and help, so there's growth, because everybody wants to grow, right? Everybody wants to help their kids, and so I'm glad that you're seeing some of that in the classroom. That's great.
Is there anything else, Kathy, I missed? Because I tried to do the big picture
No,
stuff.
you did a great job, but of course, everything's driven by the standards.
Right.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, important for everyone to know that our teachers, a part of their evaluation, and luckily it's not 50% anymore, but a part of their evaluation is tied to the high quality data. And in certain buildings, like Kathy's building with the intermediate school, that is particularly stressful
Yeah.
because those are so many different tested grades and tested levels, so.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little in the weeds now, but what Kathy's talking about is what I'm showing you. So if you click on my links, this is where I was keeping it up. You can see this is the teacher performance evaluation rubric. You can see what the standards are on the left-hand side, and then the definitions of each category, each rating are crossed. And then your people that evaluate teachers with that certificate or whatever, they're trained in identifying what kind of evidences are needed to give this teacher this ranking. So this was, the first one's instructional planning. You have, that one keeps going.
Forever.
Instruction and assessment.
I mean, this is such a clear indicator that evaluations are able to be done in like an equitable and bias-free way because you have such a clear rubric that you have to go by,
And I
right?
can show you the other one. So like if you want to see mine, this is, mine's more of a book, but
It is.
sorry about that. But it will show you, like I have 5 standards, and then the same way, this is a guidance document, because there is no certification to train someone to do, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to the rubric. Here's all the forms. When I told you there are forms, these are kinds of the forms that would be online for the different, even principals that you can fill in. Superintendents are just approved by the Board of Education and kept. We upload, but they're kept. So here's like what my standards look like. So you have vision, continuous improvement, and focus of district work, and then it describes what a superintendent would do to achieve that. Then you can see my evaluation has a formative piece for the mid-year and for the board response to work and collaborate. So that's what one of those looks like. You want to see the principal, I just want you to see the depth. Again, this is, you can become an OPES evaluator. You learn all of it.
All my dreams will come true.
Can I back up just a tiny bit, and maybe you already addressed this and I missed it. When it comes to the employees that receive an annual evaluation, do they also have a rubric somewhere that I'm missing?
Most have some kind of guidance document that we use for what the expectations, and it's based on the job description.
Okay.
So this would be, you can see principles, and this is where Kathy was saying standards, there's leadership, school improvement, I missed one, ethics and professional norms. So just like I say, in there pages and pages and pages of the different categories of what a principal, what the expectations are. And we do the full evaluation, both observations every year for them. But again, this is why I put all that in there, so when you really need something to look at, you can click through and look at what they're required, what we're required to do as professional licensed educators, as well as what we do for every employee in the district.
Yeah, I think it really highlights for me the sort of tension between, there's all these rules and rubrics and standards and all these things we have to satisfy. And then we also, with strategic planning, we have, you know, the community and the parents and the teachers and everybody saying, yeah, but we want to keep it creative and fun and have room for growth and have room for creativity and room to be engaging and room to, and it's such a big lift.
Yeah.
So, you know, we really appreciate the efforts of, you know, our teachers, our evaluators, our certainly our central office staff is doing, a lot of them are doing these evaluations and also trying to, you know, with our coaches, trying to build in all those other pieces as well, so.
And I do feel obligated, if we're gonna get in the weeds, to say one thing. Those pre-conferences and post-conferences are huge, because when I'm in a classroom or I'm with the principal, I may not see all of those rubric components. And so in those pre and post conferences, they're keeping, well, at least the principals I can speak for, are keeping spreadsheets of their evidences, so that what I might not see for an evaluation, they're able to show me or share. And so, and teachers are really good about preloading, front-loading that information prior to, if they think there are things that they might miss or they want to draw out from the rubric, because you just can't see everything in one shot. So it's even not just about the evaluation. It's about all that pre-work, and then once they have the observation and see, well, even with my principals, or I'll say, I didn't see this, or I don't have evidences for this strand, and then they have the opportunity to share that information with me in the post. So those pre and post conferences are very important as well.
And just to underscore what Lori said, I think that every single month we get to watch these student showcases, right? And you get to watch like these adorable students come up like tonight and show off some of the innovative ways that our teachers are really driving instruction in the classroom. And to know that you have to do all of this and you're able to be innovative, and we're able to see that at so many different levels every single month, I just think it's incredible.
And it's also highlights what a lift it is for the administrators and principals to do all of these
Yeah.
evaluations.
And I'll just make one more statement, that although it's not easy to just do the compliance piece, there are places that don't get past meeting the minimum of the compliance. So I just want to restate how much work is done in just the growth and the supports and the designing, even like of our professional development day on the 14th, it was last Friday, looking at all of what's needed for our professional growth, and then offering, having staff teach each other. It's things like that that I think make spring special and make this different.
Wonderful, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to do that. And we will keep trying to roll out various presentations based on what we hear from community members, based on things that we have found sort of confusing or surprising from behind the scenes that we think people might be interested in. So if people have any thoughts or anything they want to see, let us know. And we'll make Kathy come every time, because she always does such a good
She
job.
adds so much insight.
Thank you, Kathy. Sorry about that. Okay. So we're on to
Treasurer's report. So we used to do the monthly financial reports at the top of the meeting as part of the treasurer's report. And then you would approve the reports in the treasure section when we're actually approving and taking action on items. We switched, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years ago, from that and started just talking about them, doing them in the action space. So we were really only putting things at the top of the meeting when it was 5-year forecast, or when we were talking about the millage and when all of that stuff was happening last November, or not this past November, but the November before that. When something was sort of different or major, we were kind of putting it at the top of the meeting. We had some discussion and decided we're gonna go back to doing just kind of the monthly stuff at the top of the meeting, so that if somebody is here, there's actually people in the audience who want to see it and want to hear these things, they'll get it. They don't have to wait until we get through all of our actions. So I am going to try to kind of breeze through the monthly stuff a little bit faster than I have in the past, just because I'm trying to strike that balance of the people who want to hear and the people who don't. And we're trying to kind of, like Lori said, call out some of the different things that people are asking questions about and things that people want to know about. So I'm going to try to hit a little bit harder on the spotlight stuff. Still obviously cover all the financial information because it's important, but maybe not go through every single item. And then, you know, the board has had financial reports in advance, so if there are questions or something like that, I would have known, or somebody would call something to my attention or point out like, hey, this doesn't make sense, and then I would, at the top of the meeting, be able to kind of let everybody know. So I just said I wasn't going to be wordy, and then I'm very wordy. Okay, so general fund summary is always the most important. January is this second to last column here, fiscal year to date. Cash balance at the end of January was 18.9 million. And you can see we're starting to spend more than we're receiving. We do know that that happens, and we'll talk about that in a second on the cash balance too. We're in a spending deficit as of January, we haven't gotten our taxes yet, of 2.5 million. Okay, talking about general fund revenue. This is the picture of what our revenue looks like as compared to prior years. You can see we are down a little bit from where we were at this time last year. This is comparing the month to month. This is January right here. We don't typically get a whole lot of revenue in January. It's a little bit lower this year than the past. Moving on to expenditures. Again, comparing to all of the prior years, you can see that year from 20 to 21, we went down, and then we've been steadily kind of creeping back up there as I think everybody understands that expenditures and prices and costs and things like that continue to increase every year. Again, the month to month, this is January right here. Cash balance. So we talk a lot about this kind of up and down that we have throughout the year. What I haven't been hitting too much on over the past couple of years is there's a cycle, there's a cash balance cycle throughout the year, and then there's a cash balance cycle from year to year. So when you first pass a levy, you expect your balances to continue to go up for a little while because of that stair-step effect. So your cash balance goes up for a few years, and then it goes back down, and then you pass a levy, and then it goes up, and then it goes back down. We know from the 5-year forecast that we are going to start spending down now. We're in that downside of that cycle now. So you can see the orange is the current year. Our cash balance is lower than it was at this time last year. So from all of these years leading up to here, it went up, and now it's going to start going down. So we're now on the downside of that cycle. Self-insurance fund report. This is one that I continually present just because I like to look at it, because I think we're pretty proud of it. It saved us a ton of money. This balance is exactly where we want it to be right now. Our claims are pretty consistent right now. January claims do tend to go up because people start over in their year. Toward the end of the year, the high claimants have hit that stop loss. So we stop paying on those claims, and then the stop loss insurance starts picking up on it. So we hit January again, we start all over again with our claims there. These are all of the funds. Top line there is general fund. You'll see we've had some pretty significant balances in negative balances in some of these federal grant funds. We finally got some revenue here on those federal grants. We finally got that reimbursement, so that was nice. They're still a little bit negative, but they're not as bad as they were. This is where our money is. Most of it's still in STAR, almost 11 million in the managed account. Okay, that was all the monthly stuff. Does anybody have any questions on just the monthly financials? Pretty standard and consistent at this point. Okay, so I have gotten some questions, and I know there's been a lot of talk lately about the state funding because the governor released his budget on February 3rd or 4th. So that came out, and there's been a lot of talk. There's been some confusion, some anxiety amongst other districts. So I kind of wanted to hit on what state funding means to us. So I want to explain on a very, very, very high level the formula. So I took these boxes here. I've got what, nine boxes here. Is about 8 pages worth of a calculation into just this. So I want to start there. So the way the state funds our schools is they start out with this base cost here that they have calculated. So this is what they've determined it should cost us to educate a child.
Like, so per pupil, it's a base
It's a
cost?
per pupil, that's where we start. So they have all kinds of information that goes into here based on your demographic of your students, how many students you have, how many teachers you should have. They calculate how many counselors they think you should have, how many administrators they think you should have, all to come up to this base cost. How much they think it should cost to educate one child. From that, they will subtract what they're calling local capacity. So this is what they say our district can afford to pay for per child. They then take that difference and take whatever's left over and say that's the state share. So if they think that it's going to cost $10,000 to educate a student and they think you can raise $5,000, this amount here will be $5,000. In some districts, your capacity is larger than what they think that your base cost is. When that happens, the minimum is 10%. Bet you can guess what's going to be on the next screen. They take that number, that amount per student that they're going to fund, multiply it by your funded enrollment, and I don't just say enrollment because enrollment changes from, oftentimes day to day. When we have new enrollments, we have students leave, we have children who maybe are out ill and they're not included in our ADM. If they're at a hospital in Cleveland, then they're attending some sort of Cleveland school. So there's all kinds of things that goes into that enrollment. So I say funded enrollment does not necessarily just mean students sitting in our chairs. This amount's always a decimal point or a decimal number. I think they carry it out to like four spaces, but it's always interesting to me when I see an enrollment number and it's like, how do I have half a kid?
It's like the
but
average.
We do.
Yeah.
So they take that amount, multiply it by funded enrollment, and then that's our total base funding. So that's the amount that they are going to fund. From that, they take that base funding, add to it the categorical assistance items. So on top of the base, there are things like special education, gifted, English learners. What else am I
Title
forgetting?
I, like the title, are those also the categorical?
No, Title I's completely separate. That's
Okay,
federal.
sorry, you're right, this is state.
Yeah,
Sorry.
this is all just general fund, state funding. So they take that amount, add the categorical assistance into it, and then they do a calculation, which is the phase-in. And if you're following all of this, you're going to hear a lot about the phase-in. So 4 years ago, we started with the Fair School Funding Plan. We are in year 4 right now. So we've completed, we're at the end of the second biennium that the Fair School Funding was included in. And when they initially did the Fair School Funding Plan, they did it as a 6-year, it was intended to be a 6-year phase-in. So the first year they phased as a portion of it, then another portion, and then it was in 6 steps. So that's the intention. So they will take that, there's some other stuff, it's not just a percentage, like right now, the phase-in percentage that we're at is at 66.66%. It doesn't just take that and multiply it by the total of these two numbers, there's also some little other things in there that makes it very complicated that I started to try to put in here and I decided we're just gonna go with a phase-in calculation, I'm not gonna go through it all. And that gives us our foundation funding. So from that foundation funding then, they make a comparison. And there's this funding base number. This is not base funding. There's a funding base. They run out of words. The funding base is what they are comparing this year's amount to, and they'll compare it to a prior year. So this is where they get the guarantee. And the guarantee has been a part of state funding for the last, as long as I've been doing this, for at least the last several formulas, at least 15 years. There's always some form of a guarantee. So basically what the guarantee says is, we're going to go through this whole formula and we're going to determine how much we think we're going to give you. If that's less than what you got last year, we'll give you up to that amount. That's very, very simplified again. There's below the line, above the line, you'll hear all kinds of terms thrown around, but that's the basic gist. And it was to help out the districts who have lost a lot of enrollment quickly. Because if you lose a lot of enrollment, you're going to lose that funding. And then it's really, really hard for schools to plan. It's hard for schools to know how many teachers they're going to be able to afford. So that was the idea of the guarantee. There used to be a cap as well. If you want to know about it, I'll explain it at another time when it's just the two of us. I don't think everybody wants to hear. But the guarantee is still in place. So it takes, so now in the new formula, we get down to this foundation funding here. They do the calculation, they do the comparison then, and then if your foundation funding that's been calculated through this 8 pages of calculations is less than your funding base, then you get what's called the guarantee. I know that there's a lot of, did you have a question? Oh, I got excited. I was like, wow.
Don't get our hopes up.
So what does this mean for us and our funding? So this is exactly the same slide. I just threw our numbers in here. So the state thinks that it should cost us $8,062.03 to educate a typical child. We all know that that's not the case, but that's what they think. They then take the local capacity and take our property valuations, our income information, all of those types of things, and come to our local capacity. They think that we can afford $12,371.59. That's more than they think we should be spending, so we're going to get the minimum. The minimum is 10% of the base cost. So our minimum, now this base cost is not the same for every district. The average is about, we're pretty close to the average. The average is close to it's 8,000, it might be like 8,100 or something.
Okay.
But everybody's base cost is gonna be a little bit different based on their data. Then we're at the minimum, so we get 10%. So we get $806.20 per student. That's what they're giving us.
Okay.
Now, I know you all follow our expenditures very closely. You know that our cost per student is not $8,000. And even if it was, they're still only giving us 10% of that. So they give us $806 per student. Multiply that by our funded enrollment, which is this right here. We do not have 0.46 of a student sitting anywhere, but this is the number that they're currently funding, to come to our total base cost of $1.2 million. So come down here, take that, add in all of our categorical assistance, so we get about $222,000. Multiply that by the phase-in calculation, comes to our foundation funding of 1.4. Our funding base that they're using is 1.47. So our difference, our guarantee, is $26,000. So this is going to be different for every single school district. Not every district is on the guarantee. Some are not getting any. There are very few at this point. There are schools very near to us who are getting over $1 million. Those schools are in a much different situation. They're scared. Everybody's scared that this guarantee is going to go away, based on some of the conversations that are happening in Columbus and things that are happening in the papers and things like that. So when you hear or I know that there are some schools who have asked their constituents or their communities to start calling Columbus and calling our legislators and, please advocate for this and tell them how important it is. They're in a much different situation. A lot of schools, this $8,000 or this $806 that we get from them, clearly we don't rely a whole lot on the state. It's important. It's money that we need. It's money that we have planned on, this 1.4 million. But this is a very, very small percentage of our revenue. Yeah, even the 1.4. Our total foundation funding is, between 5 and 6% of our total revenue. We are very reliant based on what they have given us. We have to rely on our taxpayers. We don't rely so much on the state. The $1.4 million is not going to go so far to do what we want to do to provide the level of education that we provide. Did you have something to say?
So I want to say something about this idea of base cost per student. So much of what we read about with charter schools or school funding or all of these different things are based on the idea that you can establish. So those schools have students who cost within a very tight range and amount to educate. So charter schools, private schools have a certain student type that they attract, and it's predictable. And we are a public school, and our entire mission is that we educate all comers who live in our district. And kids cost different amounts based on all kinds of things, some of which are just age, I would imagine. I would imagine it costs more to educate a high school student than it does to educate a first grader.
Yeah, so
For lots of different reasons.
yeah.
So we are much more, it's much more difficult for us to predict year to year how much it's going to cost because we want to get our students what they need and we want to get them to where they need to be, and it changes every year. So sometimes, when you see base cost and all these formulas and they factor all these things in, I think it's important to understand that that's one of the biggest challenges for public schools, but it's also one of the best things about public schools, right? It's that we educate all of our students, and we can't just say, well, we're just going to take students who have this one particular set of attributes.
Profile,
Right.
yeah.
Right, and we don't want to.
Right. Yeah, the base cost is, again, based on a base level of education, in my opinion. We don't provide that.
Yes. There's nothing base
That's not our goal. That's not our vision here. So I had something else I wanted to say and I lost it. Maybe I'll come to it. So if you're hearing things about the guarantee, or you're wondering why is Ashley not emailing the community and asking us to do all these things, we're not as reliant. We're not making decisions based off of this $26,000 that we've got right here. All of this information, by the way, I'm going to move on to the next slide, but if anyone is really interested in looking at all of the calculations that go into here, if you click here, it'll take you to all of our funding reports that I use to really, really simplify this and water this down. But we get it every 2 weeks, the numbers change. So if I were to do this 2 weeks from now, this number might be slightly different. So this is based on February number 2 numbers for anyone out there who's really looking. So part of the reason that people are kind of freaking out is the governor's budget. When we're talking guarantee, his budget maintains the structure of the guarantee, but he's beginning to phase it out. So 95% in 26, 90% in 27. This has been done in the past with different formulas. But once this happens where you see somebody is starting to think about phasing it out, that's where it becomes negotiable, I think, and people see it more as something that we can start where they're going to need money to pull from. And I think that people are kind of scared that this is what's going to happen, is that this guarantee is going to go away. To us, if the governor's budget is what is implemented, it will not be. There's going to be many changes.
Speaking of,
There will be many changes. if the 95% is what goes into the budget, to us, that's $1,300. That's a $1,300 loss. Now, we watch every dollar, we watch every penny. I don't love when we lose money, but $1,300 is not, it's not changing our decisions and how we're planning for the following year.
A list of scary things that can happen to our funding this season. That's
Yeah, that is not it. So these little icons here, this is opinions are my own. But so the governor's budget, one, it continues the phase in. So he is proposing to continue the phase in by the end of the biennium, will be done. It will be completely phased in, which would be fantastic. Fair school funding is, you know, I show you $8,000 cost, $800 from the state per student. It's not a lot and it doesn't always seem fair. But from all of the previous formulas that we've had, this is the closest we've gotten.
Okay.
In the past, they used to just take however much, whatever the dollar amount was that they had to go toward public schools. They would take that, divide it by the number of students and say, here's your $5,000 per student. Now they actually start with the idea of what does it cost to educate a student. So at least they're looking at what do we need, not just here's some money. So the Fair School Funding Plan, in my opinion, is, you know, I like that he's going to continue to phase it in. I think it's what we need. I think it's the closest I've ever seen to being, I don't want to say right, but I can't think of another word, to being what we need to fund our schools. His current budget also uses updated local capacity data, so new property and income data, which would mean we have higher capacity. So if you're looking at that, that would be fine, but he's not using updated cost data. So to me, that doesn't make sense. If you're going to update the capacity data, you should also update the cost data.
Right.
If you are going to use 22 levels of cost data, you should be using older levels of capacity data. Because, I mean, it'd be like asking you to go to the grocery store today with your paycheck from 5 years ago. That doesn't make sense. So this is my opinion. And then, like I said, it maintains the structure of the guarantee, but it's starting to phase it out. I cannot stress this enough. This is temporary. This is the governor's budget. It's going to go through numerous changes. What's going to happen? In March is the House deadline. They will release their substitute bill. There will be changes there. Then it will move on to the Senate. They'll go through their hearings and their process. They'll release theirs. There will be more changes. Then the conference committee will convene. They'll get together and they'll reconcile all those differences and there will be more changes. It will then go to the governor's desk and it's possible he can line item veto stuff on it. So there could be more changes. So all of that is to say, stay tuned. If you have questions or you're hearing things from other districts or you're getting emails, I know staff members are getting emails from their resident districts where they live. I've had a couple questions. You know, come and sit down if you want to know how it affects Chagrin. I can also pull up how it affects any other district in the state if you really want me to. I did that actually when I was trying to put this together because I was going to provide some comparisons and then I decided against it. But it's all out there. It's all on the state's website and it's all accessible. But it's not super easy to decipher. So I'm willing to sit down with anybody who's interested. Stay tuned and I'll let you know in July what actually happens because we will not find out until about midnight on June 30th. So I don't think that anything is going to change too significantly to change our 5-year forecast. But I always like to point out that we forecast 5 years out as is required by the state, but I don't know until the next fiscal year what my revenue is actually going to be. So we do our best.
So the per student amount that we receive, that doesn't include amounts we get for grants or for.
Correct.
So it's not that, we do get more money from the state than the base amount? I mean, what is on top of
So,
that, just generally?
so this is what we will get.
Sometimes people will say, well, why do we bother, maybe we should just go rogue and be a school that doesn't take, we're so self-sufficient.
Money is money.
And,
Yeah,
so there are
state,
a lot
I
of
mean,
things that we do get.
state comply, I mean, it's not like we're gonna not have to comply with laws if we say keep your $1.4 million.
Right.
We still have to follow the laws.
Right.
We're still gonna get cited, we're still, we still have to follow all those things. The grants are separate, that's all federal. And there is, kind of a movement out there to kind of talk about, well, maybe we don't want it in some districts. In a district like ours, there's not a ton, it's not gonna change. If it went away, which by the way, it's not, but if our federal funding went away completely, it would hurt. It would hurt, but we would not change our programming. We would figure it out. We would figure out a way to provide our students with what we feel they need. We don't provide services because the state or because the federal government says provide it. We do way more than they tell us to do. So in particular, maybe federal funding with food service, for example, there are some people, some districts talking, there's some conversations going on about, we get so little, and their requirements, that Marty has to go through for our food service, in some districts they don't necessarily want to do that anymore. So they're starting to talk about, well, maybe we don't follow that. Maybe we don't call a meal, and maybe we go with our own stuff and we provide our own fresh food and that type of thing. So that's just an example. But yeah, there are definitely some conversations in different districts based on, every school district has a different situation. So based on your situation, the dollars that you have and what you provide, some cases it might start to make sense.
Which I think is the takeaway from this, from my perspective, when you see something in the paper about, something happening in a nearby district, and it can be contiguous or very close, their financial situation can be totally different. And their dependence on state and federal money, or their tax base, or all those kinds of things, so can be so different. So if you see something like that, don't panic, call Ashley or Jennifer or one of them, and we can get you the right person, because every district is so different.
Yeah, and there are pluses and minuses. When we start talking about revenue, and I look at my pie chart that I put in my 5-year forecast, and I show only 6% of our revenue comes from our state, and we are so reliant on our taxpayers versus, another district that maybe gets 60 to 70% of their revenue from the state. It feels a little unfair at times. But then this is the upside when there is question and when there are things happening that those things could go away. I'm not calling Jennifer saying we need to convene everybody and start talking about a contingency plan.
Right.
Because there are districts in that situation right now.
Wow.
That is it for my treasury report. I'm gonna go see if anybody.
So you have public participation.
Might be just easier to say, did anybody sign up to speak? No, okay, I'm not gonna walk over there then.
Okay.
Okay, superintendent recommendations. I move to approve, candidates for early graduation, 5.01. Do I have a second?
Second.
Wait, slow down. That's okay. Motion, second, okay.
So our board policy allows for early graduation. They submit the requirements to the high school reviews, and then the board accepts.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel, Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Okay, 5.02, Gifted Services Plan. I move to
Wait.
approve.
Sorry.
Oh.
Did we just approve you to graduate? Oh,
Oh.
congratulations.
Did you guys graduate?
That's him.
It is like breeze
Yeah.
right past
We're so
that.
sorry. We should,
That's exciting.
maybe we should put like a picture on the application.
Yeah.
Congratulations, that's great.
Oh, I
Our student.
I'm so glad you caught that.
All right, there you go.
What are your plans? That's great, congratulations.
Wow.
Thanks, and thanks for coming. I'm sorry we just skipped right over here. Didn't realize you were
Oh
here.
my
I
gosh.
know. I had a
make a big-
mortarboard in my office and everything. I could have given it to you, you could have thrown it, and we could have had a big celebration.
Got some confetti. Hmm.
Okay. So 5.02, I move to approve item 5.02, which is our current gifted services plan. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
So this has a huge caution. This is not
Caveat.
the service plan that we have developed based on the analysis that we're currently doing. So we are required to have on file our gifted service plan every year. We realized that it wasn't up to date and aligned to our current practices. So this is strictly aligned to current practices. So when we actually have the analysis and the recommendations given to us from Kathy Mack and the teams in the upcoming months, you will probably be approving this again because there will be changes. So I just want to be 100% clear, this is our current practice. You need to approve it and then it's put on file.
Okay. Did you take a roll?
Questions? I have not yet.
Okay.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel, Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
And before we go on to the next thing, could we offer the family the opportunity to leave like we did?
Oh, yes, you can, you're allowed to go.
Do you want to go
You're
celebrate?
welcome to stay, but if you need to celebrate, you're more than welcome.
You're officially
So-
young.
Congratulations.
Congrats.
So
Yes.
proud of
That's
you.
awesome.
Yay, nursing school. Thank you for coming again.
Okay, I move to approve the Benchmark Education Company K through 5 curriculum through 2029 to 2030, which we had a presentation on
Last time, yeah.
For the school year at a total cost of $186,462.36 as presented. And we had some percentage of that was reimbursed, I think
80,000.
80,000 and
Like,
80
yeah.
in the state. So I need to approve that. Do I have a second?
A second.
I don't think we have any discussion on this one because we saw the presentation.
I'll just offer one comment because I met with a parent this week that had a question. So what happens in sixth grade, right?
Right.
Seventh grade. They're doing that analysis right now. So there will be a second presentation for what would be sixth grade and higher. And just like Kathy stated, the standards are actually grouped by third through fifth grade and sixth through eighth.
Right.
So the reasoning this is K-5, right, would be because the way the standards work for the state, sixth grade is linked to what seventh and eighth grade standards would be. So that will be coming down the pike. I just know there were some questions because it just ended at fifth grade.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. Mrs. Bendel,
Yes.
Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Okay, 5.04 is, I move to approve 5.04, which is an application for student enrichment activities supplemental contract. For Abraham Adams proposing the Sugar Falls High School mock trial club. Do I have a second?
Yes.
Just trying to give you a quick, had a question about this one as well. Typically, things start as a club and we see what enrollment and what, how they would, if it would be developed into something more. The next step would be a student enrichment activities supplement. And so this group has been in existence, this group has had success. And so, and if you don't know who Abraham Adams is, he's with our Performing Arts Academy. So, moving to the next step.
Questions? Okay, Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes. Okay, 5.05, this is a motion to approve resolution 25-008, authorizing the required Ohio third grade English language arts assessment in paper format. I move to approve 5.05. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
This is something that Chagrin has done well before I came, and there's a digital form and the paper form, and our current mindset is that this is the best way.
Better way, so we just put it.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel,
Yes.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Okay, I move to approve Resolution 5.06, which is 25-010, authorizing Chagrin Falls Exempted Village Schools to join OHSAA for the 25-26 school year and meet all membership requirements, duties, and obligations. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
This one sometimes also gets questions. This is the organization that we have to belong to be able to compete at like what would traditionally be state level kind of competitions. Our swimmers, by the way,
Yeah.
headed that way. We had to clap out today. So kudos to them. But it's important to understand that OHSSA follows what the law would be in place, because there's questions about how their policies are set and followed.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel,
Yes.
Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Okay, I move to approve item 5.07, which I'm not going to read all of this. Bus drivers throughout Ohio may participate in the regional rodeo competition, Rodeo.
I love that.
It's brilliant.
Each spring, and the Ohio Station Public Schools, and we're just authorizing our participation. Do I have a second?
Yes.
The only thing I'll add is this is not new.
Right.
Right.
Mrs. Bendel,
Yes.
Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
And this is a motion to approve, I move to approve item 5.08, which is a motion to approve a pay increase for our substitute teachers, custodians, educational aides, secretaries, cooks, food service workers, and bus drivers, retroactive to February 15th, 2025. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We needed to make this adjustment, and you can even see if you just look at the old rate. So how we come to these amounts is that Chris Lufter collects the data. We look at the data of neighboring districts. We look at areas, I mean, all areas are UB subs, and you can always use more subs. But things when our rate was $120, and the districts that are next to us are $140, if you have a choice to work for $120 or $140, even though Chagrin has its benefits, you may take the higher day. So we have always kept our rates competitive across the board. And so we went ahead, and a lot of times we'll end up doing teachers, substitute teachers, and then forget to look at all the classified roles.
That's, yeah.
But we can't operate without classified substitutes, especially when you're thinking about something like bus drivers, if they're not willing to drive the bus, right? So we need to be competitive in that, and that's why I'm requesting that those be increased.
And I just want to make it very clear that these are all substitute positions. The way that recommended action read, it says substitute teachers, and then it's comma custodians, comma
Right,
educational.
substitute custodians,
Substitute custodians,
substitute
substitute educational
educational
aides,
aides.
so,
Yeah.
I just want that to be clear. Okay. Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes. Okay, I move to approve item 5.09. This is a motion to approve Lauren Jones for up to 50 additional hours as presented. Do I have a second?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel,
Yes.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
I move to approve item 5.10, which is certified personnel retirements. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
So just a moment for Janet Adamowski.
Yeah.
She has served Chagrin Falls Middle School for 35 years, plus she had additional years in the different districts before coming here. So her years of service in education, we just commend her for everything she does and has done for the students of Spring Falls. She will be a big place to try to fill for the amount of work and effort she's put in.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel,
Yes.
Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Okay, I move to approve 5.11 certified personnel contract. This is a motion to approve the presented certified personnel contract contingent upon meeting all requirements. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Maybe just a quick note, this is for a permanent building sub.
Right.
And so the difference would be that we have people that work every day, year round, in our district. And then we try to keep them assigned to the same building so that they're learning the students, they're learning the teachers, they're learning the classrooms. And then they are our first line of substitutes when there's an opening. And we go well beyond this.
Yeah.
Middle schools had to be filled.
I've always appreciated the continuity that this provides for the students and staff. And the first year that this started, I thought it was brilliant. So I'm really pleased to see that continue.
And the pay might look, well, it's 150 versus 140, but they get a lot of the benefits because they really follow the teacher contract and things like the insurance and those pieces. So there's more than just the daily rate when we're talking about a base.
Mrs. Bendel,
Yes.
Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Okay, I move to approve item 5.12, which is a motion to approve the presented certified substitute teachers for the 2024-2025 school year contingent upon meeting all requirements. Do I have a second?
Yes.
Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
Okay, I move to approve item 5.13, which is a motion to approve certified staff supplemental payments as presented. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Ashley?
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel,
Yes.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
I move to approve item 5.14, which is a motion to approve the presented classified substitutes contingent upon meeting all requirements. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley?
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel, Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
I move to approve item 5.15, which is a motion to approve the presented classified staff for additional hours contingent upon meeting all requirements. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mrs. Bendel,
Yes.
Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
I move to approve item 5.16. This is a motion to approve classified staff supplemental payments. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes. I move to approve item 5.17, which is a motion to approve the presented athletic supplemental and service contracts for the spring season 2024-2025, contingent upon the candidates meeting all of the requirements. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
So I do have one comment. No, this isn't an exclusive list because we approve people at different meetings. And so, for example, if you're looking at the list and saying, well, why isn't the head softball coach on this list or the girls track coordinator? Those were approved in September. So this would just be, we get these updates from Charlie and then we approve those.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel,
Yes.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Okay, I move to approve 5.18. This is OHSAA tournament payments. And it's a one-time payment to OHSAA for tournament responsibilities. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley?
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel, Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
I move to approve 5.19, athletic supplemental and co-curricular volunteers. These are volunteers for the 2024-2025 school year. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley?
Mrs. Bendel, Mr. Bordner,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
supplemental payments for the Performing Arts Academy. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
I move to approve item 5.21, community education. This is a motion to approve payments for community education, the Wizard of Oz program as presented. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We talked about this today in Tiger Forum and the success that the team had with this performance and how most of the shows were sold out. So that's just great for our community to have such a strong musical program.
And since Kathy's here, I would like to recognize her for standing in the sleeting, snowing rain after the show, directing traffic
Oh.
without a coat on for half an hour.
That sounds like something she would do.
Club bus could get in and the kids could get out. It was truly, I mean, we should be giving her a supplemental. Just that evening, it was unbelievable. Well, let me tell you, you look much drier than you did the last time. So thank you. Thank you. Okay, so.
Yeah. Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Okay, item 5.22, I move to approve item 5.22, which is the Lakeland College Credit Plus agreement. This is a motion to approve the contract with Lakeland Community College for services for 2025-2026. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And we've discussed how these come in, and we've discussed how we have agreements, and I think we did 10 last month.
And yet it doesn't mean that parents can't use it other schools or it's not exclusive, it's just. Okay, Ashley?
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
5.23, I move to approve item 5.23, which is the CCC College Credit Plus agreement. Do I have a second?
A second?
Ashley?
Mrs. Bendel. Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
I move to approve item 5.24, which is our contract with Team Foundation for services starting January 2022, January 22nd, 2025 through March 28th, 2025. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And just want to highlight, there were some questions at one board meeting about this. We did meet with that person. But this is for students that are out of school age services. So these are why the contracts are very specific and based on what we're required, what we want to do with the transition.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes. I move to approve item 5.25, which is a contract with St. Joan of Arc, PSI. This is a motion to approve the contract with PSI for student support services at St. Joan of Arc as presented. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
To be clear, this is being paid through St. John's money that the state gives to St. John's, but it comes through us. We have to manage their state money for them. So this is not coming out of our general fund. It's coming out of, it's Fund 401, if you're looking at that list of all those funds. But that's the St. John's money, and it's their auxiliary money.
Thank you.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel. Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Okay, I move to approve item 5.26. This is a motion to approve the contract with the Village of South Russell for use of the South Russell Park Pavilion on May 30th, 2025 for the preschool end-of-year picnic. Do I have a second?
I'll second. I hope they have as good of weather this year. We had amazing weather last year.
On that.
The best.
I think Teddy had like 6 popsicles from like the popsicle guy.
Okay, Ashley?
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
And we just saw the graduations the next day this year. That was
Yes.
Yes.
Mark the calendar. Okay, I move to approve item 5.27, which is a contract with Ohio Mobile Gaming for the middle school.
Mm-hmm.
Not a gambling service. Not gambling. For the field day, yes. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Questions? Mrs. Bendel. Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Okay, I move to approve item 5.28, a contract with Vin Design Architecture. This is for athletic facility master planning. And the cost is $40,000. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
There were some questions about this one too, but just to say that we have a facility master plan and improvement plan for our educational spaces and other spaces like our transportation, our bus center, but we really hadn't pulled out or identified our athletic facilities in any of that. So while we plan to do what's required for maintenance and repair, we're not looking at what might need to be changed or what should be upgraded to some extent. So last year we started doing walkthroughs and looking at those spaces, and now we're at a point where we just want to create the plan.
Yeah.
So that we know this is the order, this is what it would cost, this would be our timeline for doing those things, because we can't just look at one section of our campus and not have a full comprehensive plan for when it comes to improvements.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes. And the last one, item 5.29, this is a contract with Town Now Booking. I move to approve the contract for the offer visit on March 10th and March 12th, 2025. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And thank you to our PTO. This is funded through the PTO. This is a $1,200 grant that they're funding. Beyond that, okay.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Okay, treasurer recommendation.
Whew, okay, that was a lot. 6.01 is a then and now certificate. This is to the ESC of Northeast Ohio for the city county funds. That is the money that the county gets from our foundation. It gets deducted from our foundation, money goes to them. They actually give it back to us in the form of services. But when we apply those funds, if we don't have enough of them to pay for the entire service that we're purchasing from them, we have to do a purchase order for it. And the purchase order for the remaining amount was not done prior to the invoice. So I'm recommending your approval on that.
So moved. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
6.02 is the monthly financial reports, which I covered at the top of the meeting. I went through the numbers for January because those are the most updated, but you're also approving December's reports, which are attached here as well. Recommending your approval.
So moved. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mrs. Bendel.
Yes.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
And if your numbers weren't matching perfectly there, I think these were printed prior to finalizing the agenda. But so don't panic if something didn't make the finalized agenda. I think you have it.
Oh, do you have the one that has the donation on it? I apologize. That's my fault. I didn't
Before. It's okay.
remove it when I thought I did.
It's right on this.
Yeah. Okay,
Right.
my portion of the agenda.
All right.
So we have no public participation. Do we have anybody?
Kathy or
Yeah.
Mike,
You have something to say?
The floor is yours.
better than enough today.
Yeah.
Okay, so our next meeting, we're not gonna have executive session. Our next meeting is, March 19th here in the library at 7 o'clock. Do we know what our, circles is gonna be at?
I want to say that Kearney and the high school switched. I think it's the high school, but if not, it will be the middle school or the intermediate.
There's a 25% chance.
We should have a central office showcase.
Yes, we should.
Let Mike do it.
I'm gonna bang, I don't get to bang this anymore for the kids, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
To adjourn the, February 19th meeting, do I have a second?
I will second.
Mr. Bordner.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoy.
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel.